We've agreed you're no longer welcome in this family. My mom wrote at 12:01 a.m. My sister tapped the little heart on the message like it was some kind of family announcement. No hesitation, no second thought. Just done. I stared at the screen for 3 seconds before my fingers moved on their own. Thanks for confirming. I'll cancel all the auto payments. By 12:03 a.m., the first alert popped up. Then another. And another. And that was the moment I finally understood sometimes. Freedom doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes it shows up like a quiet explosion in the middle of the night. My name is Aurelia Wynn, and this is the night the people who raised me accidentally set me free. But before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or tell me where you are. I love knowing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if you want to follow the rest of this journey, every twist, every truth, every quiet victory, please consider subscribing. It helps more than you know. We've agreed you're no longer welcome in this family. My mom wrote at 12:01 a.m. My sister liked the message like it was some cute family announcement. No hesitation. No, are we sure? Just a clean cut through 30 years of history. I stared at the screen long enough for my eyes to sting, then my fingers moved before my brain could catch up. Thanks for confirming. I'll cancel all the auto payments. By 12:03 a.m., the first decline alert popped up. Then another. And another. That was the moment I realized freedom doesn't always arrive with a sunrise and soft music. Sometimes it explodes quietly in the middle of the night, in red notification banners and failed transactions. My name is Aurelia Wynn, and that night was when the people who raised me accidentally set me free. But to understand how I got there, you have to see where it really started. Thanksgiving in my family was never really about gratitude. It was about optics. I knew that driving up the hill toward my parents' house, my old Honda coughing in a line of black SUVs and leased German sedans. I slipped the car between a Tesla and a Range Rover, killed the engine, and just sat there for a second mentally sorting through the bills I'd paid that week. Rent, student loan, partial tuition for my cousin's kid, yacht club fees, cabin loan. And of course, the automatic donation to my mother's foundation. By the time I stepped out, the cold air bit through my not quite fancy, not quite cheap dress, the one safe enough that Mom wouldn't call it sloppy, but modest enough that no one would mistake me for one of her donor's wives. Inside the house smelled like roasted turkey, expensive perfume, and old money trying very hard to look effortless. Jazz floated from the speakers, the soft kind that says, "We read the New Yorker and donate to the arts." Marcella Wynn. My mother stood in the center of the living room, like she'd been placed there by a stylist, one hand around a crystal glass, the other touching the elbow of a woman in pearls. The gala was a tremendous success, she was saying. Our work at Wynn Women's Initiative is more important than ever. I stepped in, closed the door quietly behind me, and said, "Hi, Mom." She glanced over, assessed my presence in a heartbeat, and gave me half a smile. "Oh, you made it," she said, then turned back to her circle. "As I was saying, our donors have been incredibly generous this quarter." I hovered for a breath, then drifted toward the dining room where my father was doing his usual performance. Edric Wynn, CFO of Blue Horizon Freight Sleeves, rolled up just enough to look busy changing the world. A tall man in a navy suit asked, "I heard you have 2 daughters, Edric." My father smiled, the proud kind I'd never seen directed at me. "Yes. My daughter Ophelia works at Kingsley and Yates in San Francisco. She just closed a major case. Brilliant girl." I was standing close enough to hear every word, but apparently just far enough to be invisible. No mention of the other daughter who managed a 2-Michelin-star dining room downtown, who spoke 4 languages, who paid more of their bills than they did mine. It felt less like being a daughter and more like being staff who had wandered too close to the conversation. At dinner, the table was crowded with relatives, donors, a city council member my mother was courting. Silverware chimed against plates. Ophelia, in a sleek black dress, was explaining some complicated litigation strategy to my father's business partner. There was a lull in the noise, a rare pocket of silence, and I took a risk. "We had a delegation from Tokyo at the restaurant last week," I said, my voice light. "The reservation system crashed and we almost lost them, but Aurelia," my mother cut in irritation wrapped in a smile. "Let's not talk about the restaurant at dinner. My guests don't need to know who you're serving wine to." Ophelia smirked over her glass. "Yeah, kind of a buzzkill to talk about double bookings and tips while people are eating." Laughter sprinkled around the table. I swallowed the rest of the story and focused on cutting my turkey into perfect little squares, the way I'd been taught as a child. In the kitchen later, away from the performance, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the notification. Auto payment. Win Women's Initiative donation 3,000 USD. I leaned against the counter for a second, feeling the weight of that number, then glanced through the doorway into the living room. Mom was standing with 3 board members from her foundation, gesturing gracefully as she spoke. "We've been blessed with a very strong internal contribution this quarter," she said. "I always try to set an example by dedicating a portion of my own resources to women who don't have the advantages I had." They nodded, impressed. No one said my name. I slipped back into the room. I transferred the donation, I told her quietly when she was between conversations. "This month's a little tight for me, so..." She waved a hand, eyes already scanning the room. "This is an opportunity for you to contribute. Aurelia, not complain. And please don't mention that it's your money. People might think we need our children to keep the foundation afloat. It sends the wrong message." Back in the bathroom, door locked, I opened my banking app. The list of automatic payments stared back at me. Yacht club fees, cabin loan payment for the off-the-grid retreat they bragged about on Instagram, partial tuition for my cousin's daughter. Marcella had called it just a small favor, you can put it in your name. I did the math in my head like I always did, subtracting each obligation until I reached the same depressing conclusion: savings essentially zero. By the time dessert plates were cleared, the photographer had arrived. "Let's get a shot of the Wynn family," someone called. We lined up in front of the fireplace, the perfect backdrop for the holiday newsletter my mother still insisted on sending. The photographer positioned my parents in the center, angled Ophelia slightly toward them, then glanced at me and pointed a little to the side. "Just step a bit over, so we keep the symmetry," he said. I obeyed, ending up at the very edge of the frame, half a step behind. The flash went off. When the photographer showed us the preview on his screen, one of my mother's friends laughed. "It almost looks like a family of 3, she said. "Very classic." Everyone chuckled. No one corrected her. I laughed too, because what else was there to do? Later that night, back in my small apartment above a laundromat that smelled faintly of detergent and burned toast, I peeled off the dress, folded it over a chair, and checked my phone again. The donation text. The remaining balance. The Wynn family photo already uploaded to social, my presence blurred at the edge by the filter. A new email notification slid across the top of the screen. From Mariner and Moss. Subject: VIP booking tomorrow night. Tomorrow we're hosting a Japanese executive delegation. Please prepare accordingly. I stared at the message, then at my reflection in the dark window. Out there, I thought, is the only place anyone actually cares that I know what I'm doing. At least there, I wasn't just the shadow with the Wynn last name. A week after Thanksgiving, the sky over downtown Portland opened up like it had a grudge. Rain hammered the glass front of Mariner and Moss, turning the river outside into a blurred ribbon of lights. Inside the dining room glowed warm and golden. Every table booked the low hum of voices rising and falling like a tide I'd learned to read by instinct. I stood at the host stand in my black suit and simple heels, flipping through the reservation book one last time, mentally mapping faces to tables. This was my territory. Here, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was the maitre d', the one who kept the whole front of house from collapsing. "Big night," Liam, our manager, said as he walked by, straightening a menu. "You ready always?" I answered, even though my stomach tightened when I saw the note circled in red ink. Takahashi party, private room, 7:30 p.m. The rain seemed to get louder as the clock inched toward the reservation time. At 7:15, the hostess hurried over, eyes wide. "Aurelia, we've got a problem. The private room's already full. Some tech group came in early, said they always get that space." I didn't see the Takahashi note. I felt the air around us thicken. Liam went pale. "We can't move the tech guys. They're regulars. They bring investors here all the time." "And Takahashi?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "Takahashi Tech is potentially huge for us. If this goes bad, we don't just lose a reservation, we lose a long-term deal." At 7:32, the elevator doors slid open. A group of men in tailored dark suits stepped out, umbrellas still dripping. At their center was a man with sharp eyes and a controlled expression I recognized instantly from the briefing email and from business articles I'd read on my phone during lunch breaks. Kaido Takahashi. He glanced at the host stand, then past us toward the private room where laughter from the oblivious tech birthday party spilled into the hall. He said something in Japanese to his assistant, his tone clipped. I didn't need a translation to understand the message. "This is unacceptable." Liam started forward, beginning an apology that would have made things worse. I felt it like a physical thing, the wrongness in the air, and stepped in front of him. "Let me," I said quietly. I approached Kaido, bowed at the correct angle, and spoke in Japanese, the formal register my professors at Northwestern had insisted we master. I apologized for the error, owned the mistake on behalf of the restaurant, without blaming the staff, and acknowledged the loss of face the situation could have caused. Then in English, for the benefit of the others, I laid out my proposal. "We have a smaller room, with a better view of the river," I said. "I've already spoken to our chef about preparing a tasting menu based on seasonal ingredients that match flavors from your hometown. I will personally oversee every course tonight. Nothing moves to your table without my approval. If anything is less than perfect, I will fix it immediately. If you prefer to leave, I will understand, but I'm asking you to give me one chance to make this right." The rain against the windows faded in my awareness. All I could hear was the small silence between us as he studied my face. Finally, he replied in measured English, "If you are personally taking responsibility for this evening, I will give you that chance." Time snapped back into motion. I pivoted, already issuing instructions. I went to the tech group, switched to easygoing, slightly self-deprecating French-inflected English for the European investors. At their table, offered them a complimentary round of cocktails in the lounge and a special dessert plate with "Happy Launch" written in chocolate. They grumbled at first, then softened once they realized they were getting a story to tell and free alcohol. I coordinated with the kitchen, reordering the entire firing sequence so Kaido's party never felt the disruption. I assigned our sharpest server to the table and made sure the bussers knew that any empty glass at that table was a personal insult to me. Over the next 2 hours, I moved through the dining room like a translation machine and a storm buffer combined. I checked in with Kaido's assistant in Japanese. I charmed a European guest with a quick exchange in French about the wine pairing. I reassured a Latin American investor with a few lines of Spanish, enough to let him know I respected more than just his credit card. It felt like changing lanes on a highway at night, sliding from language to language, tone to tone without hitting anything. When the main course arrived, I stood by the kitchen doors and watched as the plates were set down, each dish, a quiet apology transformed into art. Kato picked up his chopsticks, tasted the first bite, and something in his expression shifted. Later, when I approached to check on the table, he actually smiled. Your story about the Oregon coast and Hokkaido currents, he said, that was unexpected. You understand more than food. Hospitality is just another word for respect. Mr. Takahashi, I said. We try to show that, however we can. At the end of the night, as his party stood to leave, he stepped closer and handed me a simple white business card with his name and a Tokyo address embossed in silver. People who can do what you did tonight are rare, he said quietly. If you ever decide this place is not enough for you, remember there are other rooms in the world that need someone like you. I slipped the card into my pocket, my heart pounding. As I turned away, another voice called me from the shadows of a corner table. Miss Wynne. A man I hadn't had time to pay attention to all evening stood up from a two-top near the window. He was in his 40s suit, impeccable, but not flashy, the kind of presence you only notice when he wants you to. A single dessert plate sat in front of him, barely touched. I watched you manage that entire situation, he said. You didn't just save one dinner, you protected this restaurant's reputation without raising your voice once. I started to apologize in case we'd neglected his table, but he shook his head. I'm very satisfied. I just wanted to thank you. He reached into his jacket and handed me another card. Ronan Vale, Solstice Haven Resorts. No introduction beyond that, no pitch. Just a nod and a knowing look, like he'd already filed me away under some category I didn't dare imagine yet. After close, when the last chairs were stacked and the dishwasher hummed in the back, I finally pulled both cards from my pocket and set them on the host stand. Takahashi, Vale. Two names from worlds my family pretended to know well, now tied to me in ways they'd never hear about. At home, hair still smelling faintly of truffle and grill smoke, I opened my laptop to check my schedule for the week and saw a new email from rvalisolsticehaven.com, subject regarding your professionalism tonight. I hovered over it for a second, my thumb tracing the cracked edge of my phone case, and a flash of my parents' dining room came back to me. My mother cutting me off mid-story, my sister telling me to just enjoy my tips. I clicked the email open. It was short. He wanted to meet at Solstice Haven's Seattle headquarters to discuss my professional future. I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For the first time in my life, someone who didn't share my last name was asking me a question my own family never had. What do you want your future to look like if you're the one who gets to define it? The first time I walked into Solstice Haven's Seattle headquarters, nobody cared whose daughter I was. No one glanced twice at my last name or asked, "Wait, Wynne," as in. To the receptionist behind the marble desk, I was just Ms. Aurelia Wynne, candidate, a name on the schedule, not an accessory on my parents' holiday newsletter. The lobby smelled like coffee and rain, all glass and steel and quiet money. Not the showy kind my mother loved, but the kind that didn't need to shout. I smoothed my blazer, checked my reflection in the elevator doors, and rode up to the 29th floor. My heart beat fast, but for once, it wasn't from dread. It was from possibility. In the conference room, Ronan was already there with two people from HR and a VP of operations. No one asked where I went to preschool or whether I'd been on a debutante list. They asked about the night with the Takahashi delegation. Walk us through what you saw when you stepped into that hallway, Ronan said. I talked about posture tone, the way the assistant wouldn't meet my eyes at first, how the air felt tight, like it needed a release valve. I explained why I apologized in Japanese before I did anything else, how I chose to redirect blame to our system instead of a specific person so no one would panic. They nodded, took notes, asked follow-ups. They treated my instincts like data, my choices like strategy, not a fluke. The next round wasn't about stories, it was about building something from scratch. They gave me a scenario: a high net worth family from the Middle East visiting the Pacific Northwest for the first time in winter, expecting privacy, religious accommodations, and authentic local experiences that didn't feel like a bus tour. I spent nights in my Portland apartment, hunched over my laptop, designing a stay that considered prayer times, halal food, that wasn't an afterthought, gendered spaces at the spa, and a private fishing trip that respected modesty guidelines while still showing off the rugged coastline. When I presented the plan on a video call, the director on the other end leaned back and said, "You've thought about them as people, not just as spenders. That's what we want." Another round involved a staged crisis in a training suite at one of their California resorts. They flew me down on a Tuesday, put me in a simple but beautiful room, and told me nothing except tomorrow you'll be observed. At 10 a.m., 3 actors playing angry VIP guests came at me from different directions, each with a different complaint: a late airport pickup, a wrong room type, a cultural misstep in a welcome gift. Cameras recorded everything. My palms were sweaty, but I did what I always did. I listened. I mirrored what I needed to de-escalated what I could, and promised concrete actions with specific timelines instead of vague apologies. When the scenario ended, the guests broke character to shake my hand. Later, Ronan sat across from me in an empty lounge overlooking the ocean, 2 paper cups of coffee between us, the surf pounding against the rocks below. Kaido was impressed, he said. So were we. Then he asked a question that had nothing to do with room types or service scripts. When you succeed like this, he said, what do you think your family will do? I stared out at the water. They'll either pretend it isn't happening, I said quietly, or they'll find a way to make it about them. That's kind of the pattern. He didn't look surprised. They erase you from their stories, he said, almost like it wasn't a question. And use my money and work when it's convenient, I admitted. But they don't say my name when it counts. Ronan nodded slowly. I need you to understand something, Aurelia. If you come to Solstice, whatever they think you are or aren't stays outside. They don't get to define you here. Only your work does. Back in Portland between rounds, my phone never stopped buzzing. My mother called to remind me about the Christmas gala. We're short on a sponsor this year, she said. Can you increase your monthly gift just for December? Consider it part of your responsibility as a win. My father called about a small favor, asking if he could put a new line of credit in my name just until the end of the quarter because my credit score was cleaner. Ophelia sent a link to an expensive prep course for her daughter. You can just pay it and I'll send you something later, she wrote. The later never came. I started to feel sick whenever I opened my banking app. The autopay list was longer every week, scrolling like a roll call of my exhaustion. Foundation donations, yacht club dues, cabin loan, school fees. Some days the contrast made me dizzy. In Seattle, I sat in glass rooms discussing strategy with executives who wanted to know what I thought. In Portland, my mother still hushed me at dinner parties and introduced me as Aurelia. She works at a restaurant to people whose bills I was technically helping pay. One afternoon in Seattle, Ronan gathered a small group of candidates and managers in a boardroom to discuss a potential new partnership. Slides flashed on the big screen: ship routes, coastal marinas, possible logistics providers for a high-end yacht program on the West Coast. When the list of potential freight partners came up, I almost laughed. Blue Horizon Freight, my father's company. It sat there on the slide, bullet pointed under a heading about reliability and brand reputation. No one in that room knew that the man they were considering as a strategic partner was the same man who couldn't say my name when asked about his children. I kept my face neutral, took notes like everyone else, and swallowed the sour taste in my throat. If this went through and I got the job, my work would help grow the company he led, and he'd never know his disappointing daughter was one of the reasons. In early January, the email arrived. We are pleased to extend an offer for the role of Director of Guest Experience, Solstice Haven Resorts. I sat at my small kitchen table, wrapped in an old sweatshirt, staring at the numbers. Base salary that dwarfed anything I'd ever made. Stock options, housing support in Seattle. A clear start date, March 1st. My hands shook, but not from fear this time. I printed the contract at the copy shop down the street, signed my name with deliberate care, and scanned it back. Somewhere between the fluorescent lights and the smell of ink, I realized I had just stepped into a life my family never believed I could have. I didn't tell anyone at Mariner and Moss yet. Liam would be happy for me, but I wanted to wait for the right timing. And I definitely didn't tell my family. Part of me was afraid they'd try to tear it down before it started. The other part was curious, in a dark, quiet way, to see how long they'd keep treating me like I was still just a waitress while I quietly arranged my exit. That night, I sat in my apartment with the offer email open on my laptop, the digital signature glowing at the bottom. My phone vibrated on the table, a message from my mother. "You still haven't confirmed your special year-end contribution to the foundation," she wrote. "We're counting on you. Don't let the family down." I put the phone next to the laptop and opened my banking app again. The list of auto payments stared back at me, heavy as a bruise. For the first time, a thought flickered across my mind and didn't immediately vanish. What would actually happen if one day I just turned them all off? By mid-January, my body was sending signals my brain was still trying to ignore. I sat on the crinkly paper of the exam table in a clinic near downtown Portland, sleeves rolled up while a doctor in blue scrubs flipped through my lab results. "Your cortisol is high," she said, looking at me over her glasses. "Not just a little high. This is the kind of pattern we see in people who've been under sustained stress for a long time." "Stomach issues, headaches, trouble sleeping?" I nodded. "And panic," I admitted. "Sometimes just from seeing my mom's name on my phone." She didn't smile. "You need to change something," she said. "Your nervous system is acting like it's under attack all the time. That's not sustainable." I left with a prescription for anti-anxiety meds and a recommendation for therapy, and walked straight into 3 new messages from my family. Marcella first. "We need $5,000 for the gala catalog printing," she wrote. "Transfer it today so we can lock the design. This is important for the foundation's image." Ophelia had sent a link to a must-have law enrichment course for her daughter. "Can you cover the fee?" she texted. I'm buried in a case and it slipped my mind. "You're good with this kind of thing." My father's voicemail was last, his tone casual. "Hey kiddo, I need a ticket to a conference in Miami. My card's close to the limit right now. Can you book it on yours and I'll reimburse you next month?" Next month never seemed to come. A few days later, I stopped by my mother's foundation office because she'd insisted I pick up gala invitations in person. "It looks better if staff see you." While I waited in the hallway, her assistant handed me the wrong folder by mistake. Inside was an internal report listing major donors. My name was there more than once, attached to amounts that made my stomach flip. But beside those entries in the column for public recognition was my mother's name. I watched through the glass wall as she stood at the head of a conference table telling the board, "I've worked very hard to build a culture of giving in my own household. I always lead with my own contributions." They clapped. I closed the folder quietly and handed it back to the assistant, who had gone pale. "My mistake," she whispered. I just nodded. There wasn't anything else to say. The cabin loan notice hit my inbox that weekend. "Payment overdue," it said in all caps. I stared at the email while scrolling through my mother's Instagram, where she was posting photos from that exact cabin, string lights on the porch, snow-dusted pines, captioned, "So grateful for our family retreat." "Hard work pays off." I texted her about the overdue notice. "Don't be dramatic," she replied. "You're on the paperwork. That place is part of our family's long-term assets. Consider the payments your contribution to the legacy." My legacy, apparently, was debt. Back in Seattle for a preliminary planning session with Solstice, I sat in a small conference room watching another slide deck about the yacht service expansion. Blue Horizon Freight's logo appeared again, larger this time, tagged as a leading candidate for partnership. Ronan talked about reliability and West Coast coverage. I kept my eyes on my notes, feeling a hollow, bitter laugh building in my throat. My father had no idea that the same daughter he told serving tables is not a career was now in the room where decisions about his company's future partnerships were being made. Family dinners in Portland got worse as my move date crept closer, something they didn't know, but my nervous system did. At one particular restaurant, Ophelia asked, "How's the little restaurant gig I mentioned carefully, that I'd been asked to handle more of our European VIPs and some consulting on our service standards? People seem to like how I manage things." She rolled her eyes. "Aurelia, they're being polite. No one actually cares who brings their food as long as it's hot. Don't build it into something it's not." My father wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and added, "You're 28. At your age, I was already on a vice president track. When are you going to do something we can be proud of?" The pill bottle from the clinic rattled softly in my purse every time I shifted. I started taking one before any meal I knew my parents would attend. My hands shook whenever my mother's name flashed on my screen. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, mind running through balance sheets that weren't mine and obligations I'd never agreed to out loud. Somewhere between Seattle and Portland, between interviews and invoice emails, a question started circling in my head like a low, persistent hum. Whose life am I actually living? The answers started to emerge in pieces. In one meeting, my therapist asked, "When was the last time you made a decision that wasn't about their reaction?" I sat there in silence, unable to think of anything more recent than signing the Solstice contract, and even that I knew would eventually turn into a battlefield if they found out. The final crack came on a Tuesday night while I was at my apartment ironing the one dress I'd decided to bring to my Solstice onboarding week. My phone lit up with my mother's name. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. I answered. "Aurelia," she said briskly, "tomorrow is the gala. We're short on staff. I need you here at 3 p.m. in your restaurant uniform. We'll put you on the champagne station and past hors d'oeuvres. Make sure your hair is neat." I closed my eyes. "Mom, I have work." "And I don't work for your foundation." She scoffed. "You work in service. This is no different. You should be honored to pour for the people who keep our name where it belongs. Don't make this difficult." "I'm not your employee," I said, heat rising in my chest. "I'm your daughter." There was a pause, the dangerous kind. Then she replied, each word clipped. "That is the only thing you're even remotely good at, the serving part. Please, for once, don't embarrass me. Show up, wear the uniform, do what you do best." The line went quiet as she waited for my compliance. I looked down at the iron at the dress meant for the first day of my new life, and something inside me finally stopped bending. "No," I said. The word startled even me. "I'm not coming. Find someone else." She inhaled sharply. "You are being unbelievably selfish. After everything we've done for you," I hung up. My hand was shaking so hard I had to set the phone down on the counter to keep from dropping it. For a long time, I just stood there in my dim little kitchen listening to the hum of the fridge and the echo of her last sentence in my head. Later that night, I lay in bed with the lights off, and my screen lighting up my face scrolling through the endless list of automatic payments I'd set up for my family. Each line item felt like a tiny cut. Yacht club dues, cabin loan, foundation donation, school payments, conference tickets. None of them had my name on the plaque, or on the scholarship, or on the embossed paper, but the withdrawals were mine all the same. The question that had been whispering at the edges of my mind finally stepped into the center. If I vanished from their accounts, from their bills, from their carefully curated life, would they even notice? The answer started to arrive sooner than I expected. At 12:01 a.m., my phone buzzed with a new notification from the Wynn family group chat, lighting up the dark room and the next chapter of my life. The night my family officially erased me, I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table staring at a half-finished plan for Solstice on my laptop. I'd been working on a draft for a new guest experience framework, typing and deleting, trying to make my brain think like a director instead of a maitre d'. The only light in the apartment came from the weak yellow bulb over the stove and the cool blue of my screen. Outside, the city was quiet. Inside, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, I ignored it. Group chats from coworkers, probably. A promo from my phone carrier. Nothing urgent. Then the vibration turned into a steady drumbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row. I sighed, reached for the phone, and flipped it over. Win family chat. The preview showed the first line. We've agreed. My stomach tightened before I even opened it, like my body recognized the danger before my brain did. I tapped the screen. We've agreed you're no longer welcome in this family, my mother had written. Do not come to any gatherings, events, or holidays going forward. This decision is final. Underneath, I could see that my dad had read it. His little scene icon sat there like a silent witness. No reply, no hesitation. A second bubble appeared from my mother. We can't keep making excuses for you, Aurelia. You refuse to support the family properly. You refuse to show up when we need you, and you've made it clear you don't respect our name. Then Ophelia chimed in. Not with words at first, just that tiny heart reaction on my mother's message. A neatly packaged approval of my exile. After a moment, she added, Honestly, this is probably good for you. Maybe a clean break will teach you some responsibility. My first feeling wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was relief. Like someone had finally unlocked the iron collar I'd worn for years. My chest felt oddly light, my hands perfectly still. The worst thing I'd been afraid of had just happened, and I wasn't dying. I was breathing. I stared at the screen, read the messages twice, then 3 times. The words didn't change. Neither did the fact that they'd all agreed together that I no longer belonged. Fine, I thought. Then let's make it real. My fingers moved before fear could catch up. Thanks for confirming, I typed. Then on a new line, I'll cancel all the auto payments. I hit send. For a second, nothing happened. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of my refrigerator. Then my banking app began to light up with notifications like a delayed fireworks show. 12:03 a.m. Cabin loan payment declined. 12:03 a.m. Blue Horizon Yacht Club dues declined. 12:03 a.m. Win Women's Initiative donation declined. 12:04 a.m. School tuition payment declined. I watched each red exclamation mark appear with a strange sense of detachment. I hadn't even technically turned anything off yet. I was still logged into the app, finger hovering over the cancel buttons. But the accounts were already overdrawn. My money had stopped stretching far enough weeks ago. My polite compliance had been the only thing holding the house of cards together. Now, with one text, I'd stepped back and let gravity do its job. A new message from my mother popped up. What is going on? My donation payment just bounced. This is humiliating. Another one followed. The cabin loan payment failed. Are you asleep? Fix this. My phone vibrated again this time. A direct text from my dad at 12:07 a.m. What are you doing? The family needs those payments, Aurelia. You can't just pull out without warning. We're counting on you. I stared at his message, at the phrase pull out, like I was an investor backing out of a risky deal, instead of a daughter who'd been quietly footing bills she never signed up for. I didn't answer. Ophelia messaged separately. Okay, this is petty. You're upset, fine. But cutting off payments like that? Those accounts are tied to our name. It affects our reputation. Don't be childish. Childish. That was what they called it when I finally stopped paying for their lifestyle. I went into my banking app and one by one canceled every auto pay connected to them. Foundation, yacht club, cabin, tuition, conference flights. The list was longer than I wanted to admit. Every confirmation felt like pulling a hook out of my own skin. By the time I was done, my shoulders had dropped a full inch. The messages kept coming. My mother shifted from outrage to martyrdom. After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us. My father tried anger then reason. These things can't just change overnight. You have obligations. Ophelia leaned on shame. You're not just hurting yourself. You're dragging the family down with you. I put the phone face down on the table. The apartment was completely silent again, except for my heartbeat slowly returning to a normal rhythm. I felt empty and clean at the same time. Like someone had ripped open a wall and all the stale air was finally pouring out. When I picked my phone back up, it wasn't to answer them. It was because a new email notification had appeared across the top of the screen from an address I actually wanted to see. SureSolsticeHaven.com. Subject onboarding confirmation. We are pleased to confirm your start date of March 1st, it read. Your role as Director of Guest Experience will begin with a week of executive onboarding at our Seattle headquarters. I sat back in my chair, letting the words sink in. In the span of 10 minutes, my family had cut me off, and I had cut off their access to my bank account. On the same screen, a company that didn't care about my last name had just confirmed the biggest step of my career. They had decided I was no longer part of the Wynn family. At the very same moment, I was stepping into a role where Wynn would finally mean something I defined. I closed my eyes. I knew this night wasn't the end of anything. It was just the opening shot of a much bigger storm. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to stand in the middle of it. On March 1st, I walked into Solstice Haven's 48-story glass tower in Seattle, with my entire life reduced to 2 suitcases and a signed contract. The air in the lobby smelled like espresso and polished stone. People moved with purpose badges flashing as they passed through security. I handed the guard my temporary card. He scanned it, glanced at the screen, then looked up at me with an easy smile. Welcome, Director Wynn, he said. You're on 42. Director Wynn. The title landed somewhere deep in my chest, heavier and kinder than the other daughter or the one who works at a restaurant. I stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers climb. By the time the doors opened, I'd straightened my shoulders twice. Ronan was waiting just outside, sleeves rolled, tie slightly loosened. You made it, he said. Come on, your team's excited to meet you. He led me into a conference room where about 20 managers and coordinators were gathered around a long table. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a view of the city and the water beyond. For a second, I felt like I was standing on the edge of someone else's life. This is Aurelia Wynn, Ronan said to the room. She's the person who saved the Takahashi dinner in Portland, and the reason that account didn't go to one of our competitors. She's going to be leading our guest experience across the portfolio. People nodded, smiled, introduced themselves. No one asked me to justify why I was there. No one looked surprised that I had a director title. They'd seen my work, read my case studies, watch the recording of me handling simulated meltdowns in California. Here, that was enough. Later, an assistant walked me down a hallway lined with glass offices. She stopped in front of one on the corner. Inside was a desk, a small sitting area, and windows on 2 sides, the kind of view I used to only see when I walked high-end guests to their hotel suites. On the door, a temporary placard had already been fixed in place. Aurelia Wynn, Director of Guest Experience. I ran my thumb over the raised letters, half expecting them to smear off like ink. They didn't. The first week moved like a movie on fast forward. Meetings with IT to set up my systems, strategy sessions with marketing and operations, deep dives into guest data across all Solstice properties. I learned names of people in Europe and Asia who would be reporting to me. I learned I had a budget, an assistant, and the authority to redesign entire parts of the guest journey if I could make a solid case for it. In between, my phone kept lighting up with pieces of the life I'd just cut off. Marcella texted a screenshot of a bounced foundation payment with the caption, "Your little stunt is causing real damage." At the board meeting, I had to explain why a major donor suddenly disappeared. I told them you'd decided to withdraw your support without warning. They were shocked at your selfishness. My father called 6 times in one day, leaving increasingly tense voicemails. The bank is threatening to repossess the cabin if we don't get current on the loan, he said in one. You know they're calling you too. Your name is on everything. You can't just walk away from this. This is our family's asset on the line. I listened to each message once, then archived it. I didn't call back. At Solstice, the world was turning in a different direction. In a senior leadership meeting, Ronan clicked to a slide about the Yacht Services Initiative. After reviewing the proposals, he said, "We've decided to move forward with Blue Horizon Freight as our primary logistics partner on the West Coast." The company logo filled the screen, blue and white and polished. A few executives around the table nodded approvingly. "Solid reputation," one of them said. "They'll scale with us." Ronan turned to me. "Aurelia, you'll be point on coordinating guest experience with their scheduling. We want a seamless handoff from their team to ours." I felt that same bittersweet laugh rise in my throat again, but I swallowed it. "Of course," I said. "I'll set up a process." My father had no idea that the daughter he'd deemed an embarrassment was now directly responsible for building out a program that would help grow his company's revenue. He'd never know that in the rooms where people decided whether Blue Horizon was worth trusting, my voice weighed as much as his track record. One evening, as the sun went down and the city turned into a grid of lights below my window, Ronan stopped by my office. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "We locked in the program for the March Gala," he said. "I hope you have a good dress." I laughed, the sound surprised and real. "I can find one." "Why?" "Because you're our keynote," he said. "We're announcing the Global Guest Experience Initiative there, and we want you at the center of it. You'll talk about what we're building and why it matters. Media will be there. Partners, donors. It's a big night for us and for you." My heart sped up. "You're sure?" he smiled. "You earned it, Aurelia. We're not handing you a spotlight you can't carry." I nodded, already mentally rehearsing what I might say about culture, about respect, about seeing people who are usually invisible. Then a thought hit me sharp as a pin. "Do you have the guest list yet?" I asked. "For the gala?" "Roughly, yeah." "Why, I'm just curious," I said carefully. "Is Win Women's Initiative on it?" He thought for a second. "The foundation from Portland." "Yes, they're a silver sponsor this year, right under the big banks and travel partners." "Your mom chairs that, doesn't she?" "She does," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She'll be there. They all will." Ronan's eyes flicked over my face, reading more than I said. "Then it sounds like an interesting night," he replied. "Do you want us to change anything?" I looked past him out at the glittering city and the water beyond, remembering holiday dinners where my job was a punchline, my contributions a family secret, my existence optional. "No," I said. "Don't change a thing." After he left, I stood alone in my office, palms pressed to the cool glass. Seattle stretched out below me, full of people who didn't know my history, who would only ever know me as the work I did here. They had wanted me out of their picture so badly they'd put it in writing. They'd told me I wasn't welcome at their tables at their holidays in their version of the Win story. Fine. Let them have their story. In 5 days, in a ballroom lit by cameras and chandeliers, they were going to see the version they'd tried so hard not to believe in, the one where I wasn't standing at the edge of the frame but right in the center of my own life. The applause was still echoing in my ears when I stepped off the stage. My pulse was racing from the speech, from the standing ovation, from the weight of 500 pairs of eyes. I barely made it past the curtain when I heard it, the sharp staccato click of my mother's heels coming down the backstage corridor. She appeared in front of me like a storm in an evening gown, sequins catching the light, eyes wild. "How long have you been lying to us?" Marcella hissed, voice shaking with anger and humiliation. "Director of Guest Experience, Solstice Haven. How dare you let us find out like this?" I straightened, fingers still curled around the note cards I hadn't really needed. I didn't lie, I said. You never asked. My father pushed in behind her, trying for composed failing. His eyes were rimmed red. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? He said. People have been coming up to us all night asking about your role, your promotion, and we knew nothing. For the record, I replied, you knew exactly as much about my life as you chose to know. Ophelia appeared at my mother's shoulder, makeup flawless, jaw clenched. You should have told us, she said, dropping her voice. Mom was upset that night. That message wasn't what she really meant. That was my cue. I pulled my phone from my clutched thumb, flying over the screen until I reached the screenshot I'd saved. The family chat lit up in white against the dark background. I held it up between us. This, I said evenly, is what you really meant. February 15th, 12:01 a.m. We've agreed you're no longer welcome in this family. Don't come to any gatherings. I tilted the screen so they all could see. You didn't hesitate. You didn't take it back. You just hit send. Ophelia swallowed. She was angry, she repeated, weaker this time. Anger is when you raise your voice, I said. This was a decision. And for once you documented it. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision. One of Solstice's security officers stepped closer, earpiece glinting. Director Wynne, he said quietly, eyes flicking to my parents' hands, gripping my arms. Are these people bothering you? My mother recoiled like she'd been slapped. Bothering her? I'm her mother. I looked at him, then at them. My voice came out calm. They're not on my approved contact list, I said. The security officer nodded once. Understood. He shifted his stance, placing his body subtly between me and my family. Their faces drained of color as they registered what that meant. We weren't alone anymore. Nearby CEOs, sponsors, and journalists were milling around the ballroom entrance. Heads turned. Cameras followed movement like heat-seeking missiles. Marcella grabbed my wrist, trying to pull me toward a side hallway. We will not do this here, she whispered. You are going to fix this quietly. The guard stepped in, hand lightly out. Ma'am, you need to let her go. A man with a press badge lifted his camera, recognition flashing in his eyes. Excuse me, he called, focusing his lens. Is there an issue between Director Wynne and your foundation? My mother's composure cracked. No, this is a family matter, a misunderstanding. I turned to the camera, meeting the reporter's gaze head on. There is no misunderstanding, I said. They sent me a message saying I was no longer welcome in their family or at their events. I believe them. Tonight is the first time we've spoken since. The murmur around us swelled. My father's breath hitched. If you cut us off completely, he said hoarsely, our finances are going to take a serious hit. The cabin, the foundation obligations, the yacht club, all of it is already in trouble. We need those payments back online. You know that. Those payments? Not me. Not my health. Not my boundaries. The money. You mean the loans and luxuries I've been paying for under my name, I corrected. Those are not my obligations. They never were. I stepped in because you asked. I stopped because you told me I didn't belong. Ophelia's tone shifted, the arrogance knocked out of it. Can we please talk about this somewhere private? She said, almost pleading. This doesn't have to be a scene. I shook my head. I've had private conversations with you for 28 years, I said. This is the first time anyone else has heard my side. I'm done whispering. The security officer spoke into his radio, then looked to me. We can escort them out of the VIP area if you'd like, Director. I exhaled slowly. Please do, I said. They do not represent me here. As my parents protested, you can't do this? We're her family. We are sponsors. More cameras lifted. More phones recorded. The guard and his colleague guided them away from the stage entrance. Marcella still insisting there had been some mistake, Edric demanding to speak to someone in charge. I stayed where I was under the harsh glow of backstage lights and the softer flash of cameras, my heart finally steady. I thought I would be shaking. I thought I would feel like I was shattering. Instead, what I felt was something I hadn't tasted in years: relief. I wasn't throwing them out of my life, I realized. I was finally letting the consequences of their choices stand without cushioning the impact. Whatever happened next to their reputations, their accounts, their carefully curated image was no longer mine to absorb. For the first time, the war I'd been drafted into since childhood was officially over. I wasn't surrendering. I was walking away. Whatever came next belonged to them, and to the truth, not to me. By morning, our private explosion had become public record. The business paper that always covered the solstice gala ran a front-page photo online, my parents being led out of the ballroom by security, my mother's face frozen mid-protest, my father reaching back toward me as if I might suddenly change my mind. The headline read, "Family Cuts Ties with Daughter Just Before Her Breakthrough Speech." The story spread faster than any charity profile my mother had ever curated. Commentators dissected the irony: the head of a women's foundation exposed for disowning her own daughter over money and status, only to watch that daughter be celebrated for building a program that lifted frontline workers into leadership. Donors read it. Board members read it. So did clients and law firms and shipping partners. Within a week, 3 of Win Women's Initiative's biggest sponsors quietly pulled their support, citing misalignment with core values. At an emergency meeting, the board asked Marcella to step down as chair to protect the integrity of the mission. Her name disappeared from the website almost overnight. The invitations that used to say, "Hosted by Marcella Wynn," were suddenly generic. At Blue Horizon Freight, the fallout was slower, but just as real. Shareholders started asking pointed questions about governance and judgment. It turns out investors don't love seeing their CFO in viral footage being escorted out of a high-profile event for harassing one of the company's key hospitality partners. The board suggested my father take some time away from public representation. He kept his title, but someone else started appearing in photos and at conferences. The bank finally came for the cabin. Because the loan was in my name, they reached out to me. This time, I didn't automatically assume responsibility. I forwarded the paperwork to a lawyer. Solstice recommended documented every payment I'd made on the family's behalf, and formally declined further obligation on an asset I never used and never chose. The cabin was eventually sold in a quiet foreclosure, a listing with no family name attached. Ophelia's firm began getting calls from clients who'd seen the coverage and the leaked screenshot of the 12:01 a.m. message. A glossy magazine that had once run a flattering piece on the accomplished Win Women published a follow-up about toxic expectations inside high-achieving families. Ophelia wasn't fired, but she was moved off big cases and into document review. Her name stopped appearing in press releases. While they scrambled, my own life expanded. At Solstice, the program I'd talked about on stage, Frontline to Leadership, took shape. We recruited housekeepers, bell staff, front desk agents, and restaurant servers from across the properties, and trained them in leadership, language skills, and cross-cultural communication. I watched people who reminded me of myself stand in front of executives and present their ideas, voices shaking but eyes bright. My title shifted again quietly on an internal memo: Senior Director, Global Guest Experience Strategy. I started flying to other cities to help design cross-cultural initiatives, sitting at roundtables with people who spoke to me as a peer and not as someone's child. Outside of work, I moved into a small but airy apartment overlooking Lake Union windows, wide light pouring in. I invited Liam up from Portland one weekend. We sat on my balcony with takeout containers and laughed about the early days at Mariner and Moss. "I'm glad they finally see what we saw," he said, raising his beer toward the skyline. I started a mentoring circle in a coffee shop near the office, a loose group of servers, assistants, and receptionists who were tired of being told they were just anything. We traded stories, strategies, contacts. Sometimes we cried, sometimes we planned. All of it felt more like family than any holiday dinner I'd ever attended. One Friday afternoon, an email from my mother slid into my inbox at solstice. The subject line was just my name. Inside, she wrote, "I'm sorry. I handled things badly. The foundation, the messages. The way we spoke to you, it was wrong. Please give us a chance to fix this. We are still your family." I read every word. Then I read it again. There was a time when I would have replied within seconds, bending myself into whatever shape they needed so we could pretend nothing had happened. Now I closed the message, filed it in a folder named Family, and didn't answer. That night I sat by my window with my journal open on my lap. The city was lit up in shades of gold and blue reflections dancing on the water. I wrote, "Forgiving them doesn't mean going back. It means I don't carry them like a weight anymore. It means I can wish them healing without inviting them to hurt me again." My thoughts drifted back to that 12:01 a.m. text, to the moment they declared me out. For so long I'd believed I was the one clinging to a family that wanted to let me go. Now, I could finally see the truth. They hadn't pushed me out of a place where I belonged. They'd confirmed what had been true for years. I was never really part of the version of family they were committed to protecting. A few weeks later, as I stepped out of my apartment, a group of coworkers was waiting on the sidewalk, ready to celebrate the first cohort of our leadership program. Someone slung an arm around my shoulders. Someone else handed me a to-go cup of coffee with my name spelled right. We walked toward the restaurant, voices overlapping, easy and warm. In my chest, there was no longer that familiar tightness, that fear of saying the wrong thing, of not being enough. There was space. I wasn't living to make anyone proud anymore. I was living in a way that made sense to me, with people who saw my value without needing my sacrifice to prove it. Family, I'd learned, isn't automatically the people who share your last name or your blood. Family is the people who see you, choose you, and stand beside you when you finally choose yourself. For the first time in my life, I realized I had chosen well.